They don't do it unless.
Okay. It's 5:31, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's a special meeting which is designed for public input. And Mr. Qualick, could you please take the roll call?
Thank you, Chair Rogers. Board Member Goldman.
Here.
Board Member Irwin.
Here.
Board Member Beal. Is absent. Board Member Gaffney. Is absent. Board Member Nava.
Here.
And Board Member Ingraffio.
Here.
And Chair Rogers.
Hello.
So we have 5 present. We do have quorum.
Let's see. Let's have a moment of silence before we do the pledge. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Ingraffia, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice and liberty for all. Okay. Let's see. I think first off, we'd like to see if the public has comments, general comments on things that don't happen to be on the agenda.
Actually, Chair Rogers, if I may make a correction to that. Since this is a special meeting, we aren't taking public comments on things that are not on the agenda, but the public that is here or online will have the opportunity during this time to make comments for items that are on the agenda. They'll also have that opportunity per our discussion during the items as well.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay. Would you like to make a public comment? Please do. It's your chance, among others.
Hello, PWAB committee. I don't know you all, but my name is Dan Sedley. I'm a Morro Bay resident. And what I want to talk about is the collision tonight between this meeting and Vistra. It seems unfortunate that that has occurred so that everybody can't attend both meetings, which are both are of extreme interest to the community. So that's my only comment of wondering why these two meetings have collided. That's all I have, sir.
In a way, I agree, because I want to be at that meeting too, but we're doing this just to make sure we have public comment on what we have on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, we're pretty informal. You're welcome to make a comment.
I'm assuming this is just public comment, not on issues? Public comment?
Whatever
I want, okay. I'm at the other meeting, the BEST meeting tonight.
Okay.
But I did want to come over here and get on the record. My name is Terry Simons, Morro Bay resident. Terry Simons, Morro Bay resident. I've looked at numerous updates to the financials of the wharf, and it's very clear to me that we're closing in on the end, and the end is not pretty. And I'm hoping that as we move into a new administration, that there will be a major move to do a financial audit of all the records and all the books, because when you have a $750,000 line item like is in tonight's review, that is not particularly well supported by why it is what it is, I think there's a lot more to be said. And then that's it on the wharf. And then on the desal plant, I find myself torn because I'm over protesting Vistra, But at the same time, I think that the Vistra site, with its access to seawater and discharge, would make an excellent place to have a regional desal facility, since it's also on the node of the grid. So hopefully, as this whole idea of the regional desal center moves forward, Morro Bay may be able to take a significant role in that, hopefully soon enough and large enough to where it will outweigh Vistra's desire to do a battery storage plant there. But we're running up on the time when water is going to be more valuable than oil, but it's all going to depend on electricity. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, any other public comment?
Hello, Linda Donnelly, Morro Bay. I have a few questions. I'd like to ask about the bike path restoration. Where are the permits and design for that? I don't see them online. And under PCO number 26, I believe that's to Anvil, I don't have a staff report in front of me, sorry about that. But it referenced the RO pipe on Quintana. I think I have RO, what, reverse osmosis? Well, there are no reverse osmosis pipes on Quintana. The only reverse osmosis pipes are down at Lila Kaiser. So maybe you should question what they're talking about, because, right? I mean, if they've changed the name of an RO pipe from an IPR to an RO, I have no idea. It's on Quintana, supposedly somewhere near Radio Shack. It's on your staff report. So also under your agenda, there are several more contract change orders being paid to both Anvil and Falanc for their continuing contract work for the WRF project. Page 4 of the staff report shows the city paying Anvil for another water line break, which is CCO number 68, or PCO. The contractor is responsible for damages according to the contract specifications for doing the work. They should be more careful, but they know that the city will pay them for whatever they break and whatever they ask for. The members of PWAB should challenge these sorts of requests. Who in the city authorizes this money to be spent? I'm very serious here about this, right? According to the city's adopted standard specifications, the city engineer is supposed to approve changes before being made. Where are the approvals? I guess that would be for you, Mr. Riddell. Also on page 4, it shows the city paying Falanc, Black, and Veatch for the shaky startup, as Neil called it in the newspaper, for $750,000 on CCO number 108. The plant was designed by the engineering firm of Black and Veatch, and they should do everything in their power to make sure that the thing works, right? Because it's a brand new design, never been tried anywhere, but Australia is what I remember, right? Why are the ratepayers being saddled with the cost of their startup? And what did the ratepayers do wrong? So, also, sorry, rush day. So if you haven't taken apart the PCOs or CCOs, ask those questions tonight, because this is the quarterly report. It's a very important time when you, as the PWAB, and then next as the city council, gets to talk to the person that's overseeing all of this and ask these important questions, because we're the taxpayers. We're in the, on the hook for this what are we at now? Maybe 170 million. We're not even done. Look at your agenda. How many more millions are they asking for? Is it the taxpayers? Did we break the water lines? No. They held in their contract the city as indemnified. You know what that means, right? We shouldn't have to cough up the money for mistakes made along the way, especially that money that they got for not being able to find the state water project pipeline. Oh my gosh, that was just laughable. Because they then found it the same day, they just moved back over to where they started, and the city even paid them. So just, you're our voices. You are there to represent the citizens of this town, not the people that put you in that position. Because I realize you had to try out for it, and they appointed you. But why, maybe Mr. Corlick could answer this, why is this a special meeting? Why isn't this a regular meeting on a regular day, on a regular time, at the regular place? What changed? Because this is the regular day, the regular time, the regular place, right? So how does it, yes, it's always this day on this month and this week. So how did it go from a regular meeting being able to talk for 3 minutes on each one? Because I haven't even begun to talk about the desal plant. Does the town even know about what we've done with the county? I don't know about it. I didn't have time to read it. So why is this a special meeting? I really would like that one answered. Thank you, gentlemen, and ma'am.
Mr. Kwolek, would you like to respond to the special meeting question?
Sure. Thank you. I thank the constituent for her questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to make some clarifications on some statements that were made. So this is a special meeting because in the PWAB bylaws, there are no meetings in July, November, and December. In fact, can you hear me now? Okay. So the reason that this is a special meeting is because there are no meetings of the PWAB in July, November, and December. There are no regular meetings of the PWAB in July, November, and December per the PWAB bylaws. And staff and the city and the PWAB wanted to get public input on some of these time-sensitive matters that are happening right now. If we would have waited until the next regular meeting in January, the public would not have had the opportunity to make comments on these items. So the city was proactive and put together a special meeting for today. That's the only mechanism that we have at our disposal in order to get this public comment today. Just a couple points. The $750,000 change order for FBV is not related to the quote-unquote shaky startup article that was published in our local newspaper. That is for something totally different that Mr. Palamico will talk to during his presentation on the quarterly report. The water line that was broken, that is PCO 68. That says pretty clearly in the staff report that water line was not broken by Anvil. That was a separate issue that the city called Anvil to help out on. There was also a question about an RO line on Quintana. In fact, the city now has 2 RO plants. One is out of Tascadero Road near the old treatment plant, and one is part of the advanced purification system at the new wharf facility. And so we do have a brine line that's coming out of that RO that does go to our outfall. That may be what the constituent was referring to. I'm not sure, because I'm not sure exactly which PCO. I missed that. And those are the questions that I caught, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
Hello, my name is Jim Kernett, and I'm a resident. And Actually, I grew up in Arroyo Grande and retired up here. And I started dealing with the sewer plant and all these changes in this city. And I'll preface it, I had purchased a house in Los Osos and went through that sewer nightmare, decided I'd sell there and move here. So when I retired, I moved here into a sewer plant problem. So Mike, I guess and this the young lady back here about the change orders, and it's month after month, and the price keeps going up and up. And it's, there's a constant refrain from citizens that, you know, it's going up, we can't pay this, we can't pay that. City keeps spending millions of our dollars. And when is it going to stop? I mean, I know that, you know, the city's got a lot of plans going on, but when is this going to stop? I don't understand the constant change orders with the quote, we didn't know this was going to happen. We didn't know that was going to happen. Well, this project shouldn't be an experiment. Obviously, it's not, but the city, Anvil Construction, Cogstone, Black and Veatch are all professionals. So there has to be planning and foresight, and I don't see it because I see leaks, I see, you know, the streets torn up, my neighborhood's in a mess, and it just keeps going and going. And I'll tell you, it's frustrating about the acronyms you folks use and the abbreviations. Now, I know you go on the website, and if you really dig down, you can find out what all these things mean. But what is, you know, to the public, what is BESS? What is WRF? What is PCO? What is FBV? I mean, it keeps going and going, and I don't have the time to study and become a scholar in city budgets, and that's what you're forcing at least me to do. I didn't even know what PWAB was. That took me, you know, 20 minutes to find out what this organization was and what their function was. You know, I worked in the newspaper industry for 30 years, and like any magazine, newspapers, if you use a abbreviation, you normally start out in the first sentence or whatever saying, you know, the Public Works Advisory Board, and then after that you start using PWAB. But, you know, that's neither here nor that's my opinion. This regional desalination solution, I mean, where did that come? This is the first time I've heard of this. I lived in Santa Barbara for many years, and they were talking about desal down there. It never came to fruition. It may have since I left college down there, but it's, you know, people talk about it. Are we going to be on the hook for this desal plant? Is that another project that's going to be money out of my pocket? I hope not. Had a couple other things, but I wanted to thank you for the traffic control thing. I really appreciate you looking into that because that is a high priority of mine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see if there's any public comment on the web.
There is no raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, let's move into our agenda, which is the first item is the review of the Water Reclamation Facility Program contract amendments. And we've already had some public comment on that. Staff?
Thank you, Chair. We do have our program manager here for the WRF, Paul Amico, that will be giving a short presentation on the WRF quarterly report as well as the contract amendments.
Hello, Paul. Thank you.
Good evening. Well, Greg's pulling that up. So I always appreciate the time and appreciate your attention. I will try to keep my comments, my presentation concise so that I can open it up for your questions. I think that's probably a more helpful use of our time than me droning on ad nauseum about these various things. So as I always like to do for these, first part of the presentation, give you a construction update, let you know how things are going, how they've been going, before getting into the quarterly report update, and then discuss the upcoming change orders that we're going to be taking to, or the contract amendments we're going to be taking to council next week. So during the quarter, and it's always kind of weird to have a conversation about something that ended about 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. So I'll just give you a general update on where we are today. We had been working through this entire year toward the startup of the WRF, which was originally planned for the middle of the year. Phelance Black & Veatch's contract milestone was to deliver the city of Morro Bay a functioning treatment plant and achieve substantial completion by July. But as we've been talking about over the past year, the pipelines were late, and so we moved that date earlier this year to a target date of October 4th. We worked very hard to get there. We, being the construction teams, worked very hard to get to that milestone, and we're pleased to say that we did achieve the milestone of October 4th to get everything ready. We missed it by a couple days, and we made a pretty difficult decision at that time, late the week of that particular week, to push it to the following week. And so we actually started running wastewater to the new plant the following Tuesday, which would have been on October 11th. It was a great effort by everybody. I didn't actually read the article, and no one ever consulted any of the project team that I know of about what was written in that article. So I don't know and can't speak to what was in the article, but it was a little bumpy at first. So the plant got started up, and we actually had to regroup and restart the plant after a couple days. It was not functioning well. And I was having a conversation with one of the community members earlier, and I always like to say starting a wastewater plant is kind of like starting a sourdough starter, making a batch of beer or something. You need a seed to get things started, and when we got it started, there was too much wastewater and not enough seed. So that week gap that we had there's some discussion on what that week gap really meant for us, that 1 week gap. So it was successfully started up, and the plant staff started running the plant very successfully the following week. So we got things back in line, and since that time, the city staff and Phelance Black & Veatch have been working through a lot of issues at the plant, a lot of testing and startup, a lot of what we call loop checks, or checking to make sure instruments are communicating back with the control panel and everything, just getting everything tuned in, fine-tuned. And working in a very cooperative manner with Phelance Black & Veatch's startup team and city staff. So I have the pleasure of saying that I think that Morro Bay operations staff is some of the finest group of one of the finest teams I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So they work very, very hard, and they're doing a fantastic job understanding the new plant and getting it ready to start operating 24/7. Which I believe we started doing this week, correct? Next step is then to do the RO plant, to get the reverse osmosis, the advanced purification facility at the WRF started up, and that's the next step. So we've got some key discussions coming up with the Division of Drinking Water on what that test looks like, and then we'll begin testing that equipment to test what I always call the drinking water component of the plant, but it's the advanced purification facility, both the filtration component and then also the disinfection component. So big month and big quarter for the project team. Pump stations A and B, as you can see, the pumps were set, and we got them ready, and we got everything ready for the startup of the plant. So that was, again, a very good milestone for the team. We made the connection between the WRF and completed the city main, water main relocation. I think we've talked about it in the past, but just for folks who necessarily haven't followed the project, the purified water line coming from the treatment plant, in many places along Quintana, we had to move a water line out of the way because that was really the only place we could put it. So we would replace existing or relocated existing city mains, drinking water mains, to make room for the IPR. I'll discuss the RO line on Quintana when we get to that item on the agenda. Pipe bridge was completed during the last quarter, and again, we're kind of looking things backwards at everything. discussed the WRF construction. In the last month or so, we could say the MBR, or that's the membrane bioreactor, which is the part of the process that removes the solids, the wastewater solids from the water. Those cassettes were installed, and we've got that process started up. So I'll pause there, see if you guys have any questions on construction of the WRF itself, and then we can talk about the bike path before we go into the quarterly report. Nothing?
So that picture back showing the pipes and is one of those the brine line?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Which one?
The brine line is, I think it's, does this have a pointer? I think the brine line is the
bigger line?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll point to it. Brine line near the pier, it's closer, but they have to be separated. So,
Okay, another question which popped up from the public was, does city staff participate in, do you have like a sit-down meeting to negotiate the PCOs, or do you do it by email?
we generally sit down with we have routine meetings with all of the contractors. The negotiation of the change orders is done. It takes a while.
I've done enough of those in my life, so I know.
Yeah.
Do we have a city staff member observing those conversations or participating in the conversations?
Not all of them, but generally it's the program team that.
Yeah, may I make a comment on that? So the change order process, and this is something that we've discussed with this group and City Council in the past, but happy to do it again, because there is a lot of misinformation about how these things get processed and approved. And so first, this is negotiated by Carollo, our project manager, and that's a pretty extensive, sometimes brutal process. We want to make sure that any proposed change orders that are coming to the city are legitimate. So once Carollo is satisfied with a potential change order, it is reviewed by our utilities team, as well as by an additional consultant that we have on board to review these things. He's not here tonight, but his name is Dan Heimel of Confluence Engineering. Our attorneys also take a review of it. And then they are also brought up in our WRF subcommittee meeting, which includes the mayor and one council member, Heller. And these things are discussed back and forth. And if at any point in time there isn't total satisfaction with the change order, it gets kicked back to Carollo for further negotiation. And then after that, it is brought to PWAB, as time allows, and then to the City Council for approval.
Something else I'd like to bring up. I did read that Stillwell Bay News article, and actually, Neil chose to pick a kind of a contentious title for it, but he backed down on a lot of the things which, he kind of phrased it as contentious, but he backed down and he shared what you had told him a lot, so that came through pretty good, that it was, in the end, he thought it was a reasonable start, from what I gathered, what he wrote. So it was not, if you skimmed the first paragraph, you didn't get the whole gist of the article. Let's see. Was there anything? Well, we can bring the other things up as we go along.
Sure. So, I know that there's been a lot of interest in the bike path, and we were late getting the bike path. We were very optimistic that the bike path could be open by the time we started up the WRF. That work has obviously taken longer than we anticipated, or that any of us are really happy about. But I'm glad to say now that we're making good progress on that. We were all laser focused on getting the plant started up, because as I'll discuss during that discussion of the change orders, that was a big ticket item for the city in the gap in time between when the pump stations and pipelines were available and when they were ready and when the plant needed the flow. So on the bike path, this is actually posted on the website. We've engaged with a landscape architect to put together a plan for the bike path, because when the city successfully obtained the easement and was allowed to spread out the pipelines in that area, and we got the 70 feet that was originally identified in the plans to have been, obtained, then once we got that, we had an opportunity to spread the pipes out and make those a lot more accessible for maintenance, future maintenance, and also for construction in that area. So we've got a landscape bike path, a landscape plan for the bike path. It's at about a 50% level. We've got to get that completed, but what Anvil's doing right now is getting that site graded to get the bike path, to improve drainage in the area. So because in the past, the bike path itself would flood, it would get mud all over it, and it would create an unsafe condition, and it was creating a maintenance headache for the city as well. So by spreading out, getting all that land, we're able to do some better grading in the area. And so what we're doing right now is Anvil's grading that and getting the subgrade prepped for putting the bike path, the paved portion of the bike path, back where it was, and opening up the rest of it for the landscape plan and what we'll ultimately do there. What we're doing, because of the future construction of the injection wells, is we're going to reserve the west side of the bike path and not landscape that yet, because we need a corridor to construct those wells in the future, and we don't want to close the bike path again while we construct those. By doing this, we can keep the bike path open, and during that pipeline and well construction, that contractor can put up a temporary fence. And in places where the bike path pinches down and they don't have room to do that, then they would just flag pedestrian and bike traffic through at that time. So we're doing this to create a much safer place for the contractor and the public to work, to be together, and also not impact the bike path and close it again. So what we did is we put together this picture that shows where the bike path is going to go. It's kind of a cartoonish drawing here, and that the west side of the path will be remain clear. We'll seed that so that it doesn't erode. We have to have that area hydroseeded, and so that the native hydroseed mix that we would use in the rest of the areas, places where we're not planting trees, we'll put that in, and then the future contractor would then have to improve that area to get access for construction, and then they would do the final full restoration when that work is done. So that's the current plan for the bike path. But we do need to finalize that landscape plan, because we need to identify what trees and plantings are put in now versus what is put in the future, and then what that future restoration would look like.
Paul, excuse me, could you comment on, I'm not aware that permits are needed for something like, for this?
No. Okay. We got the permits during construction to be able to do this work.
Okay, so that's a non-issue.
That's correct. So the quarterly report update, again, I don't necessarily, you have the quarterly report. I can answer any specific questions. We've covered the highlights with the construction update and everything we've done so far. Excuse me. So right now, we submitted this on November 8th. Total spending through the first quarter of fiscal year ending 2023 is $119.6 against a current budget of $159.8 million. And we talk about challenges and upcoming activities, which I've pretty much covered in the opening construction update. And so we present a schedule, and again, the quarterly report format that we see today was developed in cooperation with the WRF subcommittee and Councilmember Heller, who had a lot of good input for us, because that report for a long time was almost unreadable because it was so dense and it presented information in many, many different ways. We've taken a lot of that, moved it to the end, and so the opening part of the quarterly report is really like an executive summary, even though we do include an executive summary. So we presented a schedule that shows that we've got critical path activities. We've met that critical path to get the plant started up, and now we're in closeout mode on these contracts. So any questions on the quarterly report before I move into the change orders?
You want me to go through mine? Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, I took the morning today to grind through the report there. So what I'm going to do is, one of the things I used to kind of organize my looks at it was Betty Winholtz's email, and make sure that we could address some of her issues as we went through. I think the question about the accounting stuff, the state told, the last PWAB we had, the state told the city they had to have the data for reimbursements in a certain format, which required an accountant, probably a CPA, probably a couple CPAs. And that's, that cost, I forget which it was, 35 or 45 or whatever. In order to get the money from the state, you got to spend that money. Let's see. That R. O'Brien thing, that makes sense now. So why wasn't, that looks like that was a rough number, which you kind of came to. How'd you come to it?
Are you, I have information on each one of those change orders. If you're referring to the change orders that are.
35.
And, okay, so I'll get to that. I've got a slide on that, and I can talk about each one of those items.
Okay, then 53, I have questions about 53 too. Why?
Okay.
Who was responsible for designing that grading and drainage, but we can go from there. Okay, let me get back into this. Okay, do you want me to go through the executive summary, or do you?
Yeah, if we could talk about the quarterly report. I've got slides for each one of the change orders, and I can run down those and explain those.
Okay, budget status. How much retention is still held by the city?
Retention?
Yeah.
Yes.
How much?
We've got 5% of the design build contract, and I believe it's 5% also of the conveyance contract.
So we got, okay, so we have 5% of the construction so far.
Yeah.
What is the split between loans and grants that we had on the construction at this point, the project at this time?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I believe that's contained in the quarterly report. If it's not, that's information we can get for you pretty easily.
Okay.
The primary financing method right now is loans.
Yes.
There's been one grant that I believe, there may be other grants that we've obtained, but the predominant amount of financing are loans.
Yeah, so we have $5 million in loan forgiveness from SRF. You could call that a grant because we don't have to pay it back. We got, I think, $9.1 million from the Bureau of Reclamation.
Okay, yeah, that just showed me
Okay.
where to find that. That's good.
We also have a new grant coming in that we're taking to council next week for approval, $1.2 million. That's through the county. It's actually through the State Department of Drinking Water, but it's coming through the county for us. So it's something that we continue to do aggressively to apply for grants. We also got a grant from the state. But it looks like you found it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I knew there was, I just didn't.
Attachment 3.
I would have stuck that in the executive summary just to make sure that it was advertised.
So, Greg, you have already the total that you've spent so far, and now you're talking about getting grants. So that just reimburses us for the total we've spent so far? So
It depends on the grant. Some of the grants may work that way. Some of the grants are for the indirect potable reuse component of the project, which still is getting off the ground. We haven't begun full construction of that. That hasn't been fully designed yet. So it really does depend on the grant. For some of the grants, we have specific scope items that are eligible for grant reimbursement. So yeah, I mean that's a we're talking about $11 or $12 million of grants. Again, that's not something I can rattle off the top of my head, but I believe is in here, and if it's not, you can reach out to me and I can give you that information.
since this is budgeted for like $159 million, and we get those grants, then that's subtracted from the actual cost, because I'm hoping we won't go over budget.
The cost to ratepayers, yes. I think in one case, the grant requires some additional scope. So to get the $10 million, for example, there might be $1 million that's additional work that we'd have to do, but then the other $9 million, and I'm just giving an example.
Yeah, okay.
So it depends on the grant.
Okay.
Let's see. How much, can we use the purified water coming out of the wastewater treatment plant for the injection well test?
Not yet. We're not permitted to put it in the ground yet. That's the injection test is for determining that water, its travel time, and the characteristics, to better determine the characteristics of the aquifer so we can do the specific design of the injection wells.
So they won't let us use it for the test either then? Okay. How much water is needed for the test?
That's I don't know exactly. Mr. Heimel is running that part of the program, and he actually responded to me. Yeah, so the specific volume, it depends on the injection rate and the injection rate and the duration of the test.
Is there a guess right now?
We'll do, and we're not doing that right now because there's a state water shutdown. There's no water available at the moment to do the test.
Okay.
So we'll determine that, and so that test will include, the way that the test works is they'll inject water at a particular rate, they'll see how it responds, then they may adjust the rates. So to answer the question on the definitive volume of water that we're going to use, that will be determined during testing.
How's the water measured?
We'll probably have a flow meter on the injector.
So you'll put it on a
Yeah.
fire hydrant and watch, see how much water goes out?
Correct.
How often do you read the volumes? Okay.
I apologize, I don't have that kind of detail.
Okay.
I'm not running that part of the program.
One of the questions which kind of popped up in this thing is, one of the reasons I kind of went along with this reuse process, 7 years ago when I started sitting on this board, Rob was saying that, he had a reading from the city attorney at the time that we could step out of paying for the state water, some of that state water, and turned out the city attorney was wrong, and he left the city and stuff like that. But I am hearing now that there is a legislative campaign in order to allow people who have state water to sell it or transfer it back to the county or something like that. Is that still going on?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of that question?
The state water project is apparently is going to allow some of the recipients to divest themselves of some of that water. Is there going to be any reimbursement for that, or will we just step away from the cost?
So I think there might be two questions in there. On the one hand, if the city were to purchase less state water, I mean, that would be an amendment to our contract that we have with the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. The city has no intention of doing that. I'm not sure if maybe that was said in the past, but that water is currently our lifeline. However, there may be some tools available where the city could sell its excess state water in the future. And so that would not mean that we have less of an allocation. That would mean that we could be able to sell that state water on an open market. And that's something that we plan to look at as part of a comprehensive water supply analysis that will be put together by our consultant at Confluence Engineering.
Another question, Greg. If right now, if we get state water, the state can't charge us more than it costs them to deliver it to us, right? So if we decide that we are getting excess water and we want to sell it, could we make a profit on it, or do we have to just send it over at the same price?
We could potentially make a profit on it. I know that there was a comment in one of the emails, in the email correspondence to the city, that suggested that we would not be able to sell the water for a price above what it costs to produce that water. That's true in terms of what we charge our ratepayers. We cannot charge our ratepayers more than it costs us to deliver the water to our customers. But if we were to sell water on an open market, that changes the rules a bit. And so, our understanding at this point in time is that we potentially could make a profit on it in the future. Again, not from our ratepayers, but if we were to sell the water to other agencies. I know of one city in this county that does that now. They sell their water for 4 times as much as they charge their own customers.
This is surprising to me and educational. So my first question is, the water allocated to the city of Morro Bay, is it allocated on the basis of need, or is need factored into it?
It's a contractual allocation, so Damaris will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we get 1,313 acre-feet a year by contract. We only use, on a typical year, somewhere between 900 and 1,000 acre-feet per year of state water. And so we've purchased that other water up to that 1,313, and so that extra water gets stored for us in San Luis Reservoir.
Right, but I suspect that nevertheless, the allocations of water statewide are somehow based on the needs of each community getting their fair share of the water. The reason I mention this is I find it hard to believe that going forward, the state is going to condone one community essentially getting more water than it needs and being able to sell it at a profit. That seems to me to be unrealistic.
That's not quite how it works. It really is based on the contracts and the state's obligations to fulfill the terms in those contracts. That said, during low allocation years, during extreme droughts like what we're experiencing right now, the state may say, you're only getting 5% of your allocation. But they do that across the board. They don't pick and choose which cities based on need or anything like that. In some cases, if the water supply is very low and if the state doesn't feel confident that it could meet its obligations, even in a 5% allocation year, what they could do is give a kind of minimum 55, I think it was 50 gallons or 55 gallons per capita. So what they would do is they'd look at what our population is and just times that by 55. And so in that way, that would be based on need. But that's only in that very extreme situation where there's an extended drought over several years.
Okay.
I do also want to answer Board Member Irwin's question about how much water is needed to test the pilot injection well. So I did get confirmation that that's about 17 acres of water.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 17 acre-feet of water.
So so we're talking about 50,000 gallons?
Correct.
Okay.
No, we're talking, Damaris, if you could do the math quicker than me. If there's about 3, in 1 acre-feet, there's about 300,000 gallons.
Okay.
So if you times that by 17.
So
Yes, so.
50 million or something like that. Okay. Then the last thing I had some questions on, the critical path.
It's about 5 million gallons, by the way.
Oh, 5 million, okay, whatever. Yeah, I don't have a calculator in my hands. So then the other question I've got is critical path. I was hoping you'd provide some clarity. So wastewater commission, our critical path within the allowable schedule for our project right now?
So right now, so just for everybody's sake, a critical path is the path of activities that are critical to complete or achieve a milestone, right? So you've got, for instance, paving. Paving the roads isn't on the critical path. You don't ever really want activities like that to be on the critical path. Completing the pipe bridge controlled the critical path of startup for the plant. Completing the pump station. So we all along had pump stations and the pipe bridge on the pipeline project. The pump station completion and commissioning and the pipe bridge were the two major activities that controlled whether, when we were able to deliver wastewater to the plant. So we met that with the conveyance facilities. The conveyance facilities we are now in restoration activities, we're in completion activities, completing other elements of the scope of work that did not relate to completing the pump stations and pipelines. Did I answer your question then?
Roughly, and then you've got critical path wastewater commissioning. Does it look like that we're going to run into trouble with meeting our schedule with the commissioning?
No.
Okay.
No, in fact, as I stated earlier, the plant is now up and running 24/7.
So
we've technically, and it's producing very good quality effluent. So we've technically met the requirements of the time schedule order.
Is it possible that we could ask the state for permission to start using the discharge from the IPR for some of these extra costs in the water?
We are not permit. We have not obtained a permit to operate the drinking water component of the plant.
Has there been a discussion with the state about using that water or just dumping it?
You mean the water during commissioning while we're testing that facility? We don't have a choice at this point. We aren't able to use that. There's no beneficial use of that water until we get the permit from the Division of Drinking Water.
Okay. And then I was looking at pilot injection tests. And so the last thing that we have to do on that pilot injection test is actually run the test. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's going to take, what, about 30 days?
I think, again, I apologize. I'm not running that part of the program, so I don't.
And I would like to make that clarification too, that Carollo is not managing the recycled water portion of this project.
Okay.
But since you asked the question, it will take approximately 30 days, but that can only start once we start receiving state water again, which we believe will happen in the middle of December. So that test should be done towards the end of January.
So right now, the critical path shows that we should be past the pilot injection test right now if this plan is right.
Yeah, and a part of the issue there is that we had an unanticipated extended state water shutdown, and that's the reason for the delay. We were hoping to do the pilot injection well test well before the state water shutdown. That didn't happen. Then state water shutdown happened, and so now we're looking at starting in December.
Okay, so the schedule will need to be adjusted then?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and so as Mr. Amico mentioned, this is the quarterly report that goes through September 30th. So we always have this debate about, do we include the most current information and not be true to the timeline that's stated on the report? Or are we true to the information, only including information in the report that's within the timeline of the report? And that's one of the challenges of the WRF quarterly report. It generally comes around 6 weeks after the conclusion of the period over which it covers. And in the interim, so much has happened in the project because it's an active project.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, let's see. I will have some questions when we get to PCOs then.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions before we move to PCOs? Okay. So contract amendments. There are 3 contract amendments that we will be taking to council next week for council consideration. The first one is for Cogstone Resource Management. Cogstone organizes our Native American and archaeological monitoring across the majority of the pipeline project. We put together, and their contract's been amended one other time once we got the full view of what those monitoring requirements were going to be, and so we've amended their contract one more time, or a time prior. They've incurred more costs. There's been more monitoring that has occurred across the project for us to meet the milestone to start up the plant, and so this contract amendment will be for just shy of $100,000, $97,535 to wrap up the project and complete it. So, any questions on that before we move? And then I presume what we would do with these is that I'll go through each one of the contract amendments and then take your questions and then move to the next one. So that's how I would do that. Anything on the Cogstone amendment?
Paul, is that, that also includes the test well site?
It does not.
No?
It does not. This is just for the pipelines component of the program.
All right, thank you.
I can speak to that process. And once the similar to the pipelines, and one of the things for us that makes it kind of challenging and has been a big challenge for the program team was due to the requirements of the requirements of the environmental component of the EIR. We have to very specifically define where the pipelines are, because in cultural resource monitoring, feet matter, inches matter, right? And so you have to progress the design to a very high level before you can actually go out and do the testing necessary to determine what kind of monitoring you're going to have to do. So for the injection well component, that design is going to have to be progressed to a high level before that component can be defined. So right now, this only includes, and everything I'm presenting is only for the WRF and the conveyance facilities. Okay, so for the Anvil amendment, we have 3, 6, 9, we have a dozen potential change orders. That's what PCO stands for. These are for changes in scope to the project, and the majority of these are driven by unforeseen conditions. Unforeseen, we can't look at every square inch of earth that these guys are going to unearth along the path. So they're going to encounter unforeseen conditions and change site conditions. And when that happens, they are entitled to additional compensation if they incur effort beyond what they anticipated in their bid.
Whether it was a fixed price or a cost reimbursement contract. Either way, right?
Correct. And it's tricky because when you're in construction, you lose a bit of leverage. I mean, the reality is that you lose, your best day in construction is on bid day. And so when you're in what we would call a force account situation or a change site condition situation, we receive their pricing, we do a lot of negotiation, we look at what's allowable within that scope of work, what should have been attributed to the bid. It's more of an art than it is a science. There are many, many changes to this contract that nobody ever sees. We tell them we're not going to take that. That was in your scope of work. So there's a lot of give and take in the contract, and not everything that is changed. The city doesn't pay for everything that changes. There are, in fact, 2 or 3 changes that during negotiation I just told them flat out we're not going to pay for that. So we do a fair amount of that with the contractors, and we'll talk a little bit about the Felance Black and Veatch change order and the delay claim here in a minute, but. So in this particular one, number 26, which is relocating, number 35, the existing RO brine line discharges to the WRF outfall, and other DDW initiated. Some of these are regulatory driven changes. For instance, the city historically took the Brackish RO facility, the discharge from that, the reject, the brine from that, when we're making drinking water from brackish water or salty water, you take the salt out of the water and you take a concentrated salt discharge and you have to put it somewhere. And that, in this case, it went through an old outfall that was associated with the power plant. When the city was back, when the city was negotiating the NPDES permit, the permit renewal or the permit for the new WRF, the regional board came back and told the city, you can't discharge to that outfall anymore. You have to combine those discharges and put it into your outfall, your ocean outfall that goes off. This was during construction. So because that facility and those changes affected the pump station A site, we needed to make changes to the underground piping, because if we'd have just said, okay, fine, we'll figure that out later, we'd have to go back and tear up that site. So while we were in construction, we had to make modifications to underground piping so that once we pave the site, we don't go and tear it back up again. So the brine line discharge number 35, and then there was another one. Maybe we've already done that, and then that one. That in particular, those brine line discharges, that included those other modifications underground. Sorry, I thought there were 2, but there was only 1. So that was a particular one that was driven by a change in regulation or a directive from the state regulator during construction. So that was a change to the scope. So the relocating the 12-inch city RO line, Station 87, and then the DDW initiated realignments between 99 and 116. So between stations 99 and 116, which is between the roundabout and roughly Forever Stoked, that there is an RO line. The brackish RO discharge, the brackish RO facility makes purified drinking water, and it's pumped to the Kings tank. And so that water line goes along Quintana. And so, so we had to, we found an underground thrust block, or a big concrete in the ground that prevents the pipes from moving around underground. We found that during construction and thought we would only have to relocate a bit of it. And in fact, it turned out to be several hundred feet. So in this particular case, it was an underground condition that necessitated us to move that water line. The DDW-initiated realignments is there's drinking water lines that go across the what we call the joint trench, or where the force mains and the brine line are. DDW during construction came back to us and said, hey, we've looked at this again, and we think those things are too close. You need to either relocate the water lines, or in some cases we had to sleeve them. So again, it was a change in scope after the project was bid and it was during construction. Had we known about it during design, the city would have paid for it in the scope of work anyway. Restoration of Quintana near Kings during inclement weather. The road came apart and it created an unsafe condition, and we had to actually make repairs. It really wasn't even associated with the project, but it was because the road, it was not safe to be in there. Since we had Anvil working in the area already, we asked them to, the city asked them to make some repairs to the road in that area. Atascadero, brine and joint trench realignments. In that particular one, the city is going to be moving forward with a different project for a sewer line, a new sewer line that's going to go in Atascadero Road, and we actually needed to realign these pipes in order to make room for all of that infrastructure underground. Most of the cost of this particular one was investigating existing city water lines that were poorly mapped, and so we did a lot of potholing in the area because the utilities, once they got in and started digging, just weren't where the record drawings said they were. So we needed to make room in that, and that again was a change that was made during construction. So the PSB grading and drainage revisions at Pump Station B, it was an error on in the surveying of some of the surrounding Limos parking lot, and in that particular case, had it been constructed in the manner that it was included in the design drawings, it would have actually flowed onto Limos. So we had to make adjustments because that site is so flat. It required a much more enhanced drainage system for the surface water, the surface flow, than was originally envisioned in the design.
You weren't able to use the drainage channel next to the site?
No. That's Caltrans. We had to push it to the street.
So Caltrans said no?
No, we can't use that, no.
Yeah, I know. Did you ask Caltrans?
I'm not sure if we asked Caltrans or not, but
okay.
I'm guaranteeing the answer would be no on that. Because that's designed to take highway drainage and not city drainage. That site would have historically drained, and because we improved the site, it needed to go to the city's storm drain system.
Okay.
So 200 linear feet of fused 4-inch HDPE, that was associated with the leak at the Cloisters pump station. So Anvil was working in the area. They had a lot of HDPE, and they actually helped city crews out in that case to get some pipe to help with that situation that I can't remember when that occurred. It was back in the summer, I think.
It was basically my street.
Yeah. So so the Anvil provided some emergency pipes for the emergency repair. The FCA restraint rods and lugs at the pump stations. This was actually an error in the design. It was an oversight on the designer's part, and so some additional restraint needed to be put on the above ground piping. And one of the tricky things with change orders, as I think I've discussed in the past with you all, has been if the city would have paid for it in the bid, then the contractor is entitled to be compensated for it. And it's one of those things where it's sometimes hard to determine whose real error it was or whatever. But in this particular case, the piping needed additional restraint. It was going to come apart if it didn't have this, so this had to be added during construction.
Was there any additional cost beyond, just the basic restraining of the pipe?
that's what this is.
No, what I'm saying is, so, we had to do these restraints. Did the final cost there, did the air cause any increase? Not in the final cost, but was there some stuff you had to do in order to recover and get things to work right?
No.
Okay, so there was no additional work costs, it's just additional costs.
Correct. Just this is material and then installing the materials. The change wet well piping, fit up bolts to 316 stainless. This was, again, I think it was something that was a request that they had made for material, either the material that wasn't available or the material that was specified they didn't believe was going to be adequate. And so it went to the designer and they said, yeah, we should make those stainless steel. Pump Station A retaining wall revision, there was a portion of Pump Station A, the retaining wall there on the back side of Pump Station A. During design, that area behind that was inaccessible, and so the designer couldn't get a survey of the ground surface once that area was exposed. Then they got the ground surface elevation was much lower than they thought it was originally, and so they had to make changes to that retaining wall on the back side of that. And then the water line breaks on Atascadero Road. All those water lines down in Atascadero Road are what's made of what's called asbestos cement pipe, and that pipe does not perform well long term. That pipe's old, it's brittle, it's very difficult to repair, and so during construction, there was some. They would move on, and then later on a water main would break. The contractor actually across the street at the hotel actually also experienced some water main breaks around that same area. So it's difficult. They did incur cost for this, and in fact, the city made some of those repairs as well. So it was just aging infrastructure, old infrastructure that couldn't stand up to the wear and tear.
Was that piping originally installed by the county?
I don't know.
What did you refer to it as? What was that?
Asbestos cement pipe. AC pipe is what we call it.
Because I assume that since the wastewater treatment plant went online around 53, we weren't a city until what, 64, 65, so we're dealing with stuff which we didn't have control of at the time, I suspect. Okay.
I think that's everything.
So I have a question on
Yes.
this. So this is work that has already been done, and you've already negotiated with the whole team on what the price is that the city is going to pay?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you're just giving us an explanation of what the costs are, and there's nothing that we can say, oh, well, don't do that or don't do this.
Yeah, I mean, you could.
Well, I'll answer that question. So the way this works is that those costs and that negotiated amount is approved by City Council. And that's happening next week. And the purpose of bringing it to PWAB is, as you know, in the bylaws, the purpose of the PWAB is to advise City Council on these kinds of matters. So the thing that the PWAB would do here is to take a look and give us as staff input on what you all think about these change orders and the costs, et cetera. And then we would take that input to the City Council when we bring it to them next week.
But if it's already a done deal, then what is our input?
Not quite. It's a done deal in terms of our side of the process. But in theory, the City Council could say, no, we're going to reject, 4 of these change orders. Now, we could expect a lawsuit from Anvil because the change orders, in our belief, are legitimate. And they, of course, would have evidence of that. But again, this is sort of a check in the system. So PWAB and City Council are serving as a check on that.
So then another thing, this is sort of minor, but we were discussing it before. Do these change orders include like a percentage, for like 10% profit for the?
They do. I mean, yes, they do. The contractor provides us the pricing. They show us their labor rates and
their profit.
Yeah.
So really, that's the only negotiable part of it.
Actually, in many of these cases, they submitted costs that were higher. In many of the cases, they would come back to us and say, and I'm not going to make up things here because then somehow, but many of these were higher. And we came back to them, we said, we don't think that's a legitimate charge. And the way that works is we have an inspector out that watches them do the work, and then we go check his daily reports, and we compare it against the pay app. We look at who was on site, what were they doing that day, were they nearby. They have to give us tickets for changed conditions. They give us, we call them T&M tickets, time and materials tickets. So he's out there looking, and then we compare the T&M tickets against his inspection report. We look at what they were doing. Sometimes they sometimes might price it as though they just turned up on site that day and started doing the work. And you're like, well, you didn't even have to drive across town. You were right there. So we really only should pay you for some additional material and then the time it took you to do those things. So there's a fair amount of negotiation that goes into this where we will challenge their level of effort and then their labor rates are stipulated in the contract. They have to pay prevailing wage and they have to pay it in accordance with Davis-Bacon labor laws.
So Anvil is a fixed price contract?
No.
It's a cost reimbursement?
It's time and materials. Unit price, we call it a unit price project. So if they bid 10,000 units of something at $1 each and they only install 9,000 units, we only pay them for 9,000.
I'd like to say, this is my second meeting on this board, so I bring sort of the perspective of a newcomer here. And I'm sure I cannot even begin to understand the complexity of this enormous project. But as a newcomer, I suspect that the citizens of Morro Bay, and particularly the people watching this broadcast, they watch this meeting, one, to determine if the project is making decent and scheduled progress, and if they're getting their money's worth. And I was really gladdened to hear that this is vetted by your office and by the Public Works Office, and then by the City Council and other consultants, and then ultimately probably by the City Attorney's Office. That's a wonderful group of intelligent, really skilled eyes looking at it. And with respect to the Anvil explanations as to the overages, if you will, I as a newcomer think that they're fairly adequate. I'm not quite so enthusiastic when it comes to the next group, but the reason I'm saying it at this point is I would hope that each one of these explanations for these PCOs would have a brief, explicit narrative, including some facts, as to why the cost should be legitimately and appropriately borne by the city as opposed to the contractor. As I say, for the most part, I see them within the Anvil explanations. They are less apparent to me in the FBV's explanations, because they I'm afraid are more opaque, and that opaqueness creates doubts in the minds of the people who are relying on us and watching this broadcast. So that would be my suggestion for the future, for what it's worth.
I appreciate that. That's a good insight.
Okay.
Next, we can move on to FBV unless there's other additional questions on Anvil. On the Anvil.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay, I'll try, again, I try to be brief, but, okay, so FBV Amendment 8, there are 3 of these items that we brought to the last PWAB meeting. As they went to council, I received some additional information that prompted me to pull them from the council agenda. So they're back. We got the information we needed, and so the 3 of those are the SRF reimbursement requests, the wash rack grease and sand interceptor, and the Vactor unloading facility revisions. So, Board Member Gaffney, the one reason that this is a little bit quite a bit different than the Anvil changes is because it's the nature of the contract. It's the nature of design build and the definition of what is in the scope of work and how that's defined and who pays for what and what's included. In the design build contract in this particular case, they offered the city what we call a guaranteed maximum price, or a GMP, and then they're expected to deliver this within that GMP. When they encounter something that could risk them going over that GMP, they would come back and they would claim, again, that it was not necessarily originally included in the scope of work. There are a fair number of these changes that have been made to the facility that this board and the city council never see because we negotiate them out before they even get here. So in these particular cases, FBV has a strong case to make that these were not included in the original scope of work. These were changes that were made during, so you're not board? Okay. I was trying to be polite, and look what it got me. So it got you a new name tag, though. So anyway, so in this particular case, so hydroseeding soil amendment and coverage limits, this particular one is the final piece of the change order that was related to the soil slip that occurred there. What ended up happening with that soil slip was the final restoration of that area. The construction manager and Phelance agreed that they would that we would hold that hydroseeding line item to see if there was additional seeding that needed to be done outside of that area, and it turns out there wasn't. So it was time for this one to be brought, and that will settle that matter completely. The SRF reimbursement requests. So the design build contract originally requires FBV to submit so much documentation or however much documentation, and then when we started doing SRF reimbursements, SRF requires a much more robust set of documentation. And in this particular case, each and every month, it took them a lot to retroactively go back and get that data in order for the state revolving fund process and the folks that are reviewing the invoices. And then going forward, they incur costs each time to do this. And so that was not originally envisioned in their scope of work. That level of accounting and that level of detail that was going to be provided to SRF. The next two were enhancements to the design, the actual design and operation of the plant. We did get a question about a wash rack at the plant that is there to wash utilities trucks. Utilities department goes out and they do a lot of work digging holes in the ground. They deal with sewer lines. They deal with water lines. They get dirty. There's a shower in the ops building, and their trucks get dirty because they got mud in there. So they have to wash their trucks, they got to wash their tools, they got to wash their bodies. So that there's the ability for them to keep their equipment clean and in good operating condition, and so that was needed. That was a change that was made during the design as the utility staff started looking at the facility and realizing that was something that was not originally included in the scope of work. So the defer seed plant milestone. We've been talking about this to council for quite some time. I think the last 2 or 3 quarterly reports that we've discussed, we had budgeted $1.5 million because the pipelines were not ready when Phelance Black & Veatch needed them to be ready. And through time and through a lot of pretty tense negotiation, we negotiated them to $750,000. Their original estimate was going to be between $1.5 million and $2 million. We started looking at what they were providing us in terms of backup and substantiating that claim that it was going to be that level for what we viewed was a couple months of delay. And so through that process and a lot of back and forth and a lot of tense but friendly discussions, we got to a settlement of $750,000 to settle their delay claim. So that was to pay for their extended overhead, what we call extended overhead, for the time between when they needed the wastewater available to them and when they actually got it. So that was not anticipated in their scope of work. And that, so the last slide, and it is included in the staff report, is on the fiscal impact, our approved budget. So we provided the numbers to say that budget remaining in the WRF line item is just over $1 million. And that does include, we do budget for contingencies, so there's just over $1 million left in that line item. The GMP in this particular case, we list this GMP with the amendments, and then we call it the proposed GMP because this last amendment has not been approved yet. So the proposed GMP of $78 million. But within the contract, there is a provision that if FPV brings this plant in $4 million or more under that guaranteed maximum price, the city and Félix Black & Veatch split the savings. So, but we carry the full GMP as though we're going to spend every dollar on the contract. So we'll pick up a couple $1 million if they meet that requirement of the contract. So the project's not done yet, and so that's why we carry this in the budget. So that's in that line item. Conveyance facilities budget laid out much the same. You'll see that we have negative budget remaining, and you'll see you have negative budget remaining for Cogstone. That's why we have program contingency, and in the staff report, we did list that we are going to be digging into that program contingency to make, to cover these within the budgeted line items. So that's how we view this, is this with the budgets. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Is there any further questions?
Well, it's not, of course, that item 108 is what, because of the size of the overage, it really got my attention. And you know, I don't want to intrude in any kind of proprietary negotiations or things that are best left private, but the company was negotiating for, what you said, well over $2 million?
The original gut number that they threw at us was $2 million. Then they gave us a number that was a little less than that, but still kind of a, that isn't going to work number. So that's when we began rolling up our sleeves. And
well, you know, I think you ought to be congratulated in reducing that number significantly, really. But could I ask, you know, conversely, were you originally arguing that the city owed them nothing? I mean, was it a zero versus 2 million plus, or was it something but, you know, drastically less than?
We knew it wasn't zero. They're entitled. We were past the date for, their original substantial completion date was July 12th, and we said the pipelines weren't going to be ready until October. In fact, Anvil had given us a schedule at the time that wasn't showing the pipelines to be done until January. And so we worked with Anvil and their schedule. We came back, we looked at the schedule, we looked at the time schedule order date. This is all back in February when we started this conversation, January, February, when it became very clear that Anvil was not going to make it. And so that's when we opened that up. They wrote us a letter or an email at the time reserving their right and saying that they believed that we were going to be in a delay situation. And we said, well, we'll see about that. And so we said, keep working. We need our plant. Keep working. Do not slow down. We need our plant. We need our plant. You don't know what's going to happen over there. Don't worry. You know, so that's how that went. They were entitled to additional compensation because that delay was real. I mean, it was a real delay to them. We had to scramble their work program. That's one thing you don't do to a contractor, is if you don't mess with how they want to do their means and methods. And we knew we needed to do that. And so it did expose the city to them being able to come back and be entitled to additional compensation for us doing that. Mm-hmm. So we didn't disagree on merit. And at that point, it was then dig in and try to minimize that delay.
I can see that. And so because this was such a large amount, and you know, maybe regarded as a notoriously large amount, this is probably a prime example where, admittedly, you cannot make these reports so god-awful long that, you know, that no one can read them. But this is an area where a bit more detail to sort of head off the wrong opinions about it, just why we were conceding this would be useful. Yeah.
Again, appreciate the feedback.
For that extra 7 days, I gathered you're not ready to just do a unit price extension. You're going to sit down and look at what they actually did and what additional labor they needed.
Are you referring to the what we refer to on our side as bucket 2, which is, this is bucket 1, which is the 750, which was July 12th to October 4th. Mm-hmm. 7 days. We did not disagree that they were, again, delayed. We have not received the full pricing of that yet. And when we do, we will start the negotiation process with them, because the art of that is, well, were you really delayed with all of that? Like, you threw everything in that bucket now, as opposed to you were actually doing your job over here on contract. And so we have this discussion about, does it really belong in the bucket or does it not? And so those discussions are ongoing.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to call for public comment. Is there any public comment?
We couldn't hear you, sorry.
Public comment on this agenda item?
I would have taken notes, because I was thinking in my head, there's so much that he said that answers questions and then asks more questions to me, you know. I was under the impression, and Mr. Amico might be able to clarify this, is that we already paid Falank, Black and Veatch, their delay claim of $1.5, close to that, $1 million. And, yeah, I know he's talking about, this, that's 6 weeks ago, right? And am I wrong? I mean, can he answer? I mean, because now he's saying they got that down. If it's a different delay claim, I'm just trying to figure that out, because now he says it's down to $750,000. Because there was a delay, but there was still a lot of work up there that Falank, you know, cleanup, whatever has to happen before the failure of the seeding of the fluent. Am I wrong, Paul?
Our practice is to hear the public comment and answer questions at the conclusion.
Well, so maybe, you know, he could answer that, because if there were two, I'm feeling like maybe we're addressing another delay claim that they asked for. Because I know that the city council passed to pay them over $1 million and some dollars. Gosh, what else was there? Shoot. I think what I heard Mr. Kolek say to you people is that you can tear apart these POs, you know, and give your recommendation to council. So Mr. Kowalik will take that recommendation on anything that was heard tonight on these and pass it on. You know, you don't have to accept just because it's been a done deal. You know, there's things that you can comment on that will go before the city council. But I agree, it's not going to change much. But just having verbal feedback that PWEB suggested this, or on this PCO, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I would really like to know if this is a second delay claim or it's part of the one we're talking about from before. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to reiterate my questions and concerns. These constant change orders keep coming. I don't know who, I mean, I've watched the process, and there should have been a detailed plan, I imagine, architecture plans, et cetera, to figure out the costs and give the city a bid on the project and stick to the bid. I mean, I have a house, when I had a house remodeled, I get a bid from 5 contractors, and I pick the bid, and they stay on the bid. But it doesn't seem the case here. It seems there's just an open checkbook from the city, and like if a frog comes up and there's a problem with a frog, or there's archaeological studies that need to be done, I would imagine that should have been done ahead of time. I'm not blaming you, but the whole process has been, there's a lot of hiccups. to say the least. And I don't, me as a homeowner, I don't need the excuses. I just want to see the project done, and it's never going to be done on the basis or the budget that was proposed, and it just seems going up and up and up, and I'm going to end up paying water and sewer rates going up and up and up for the next 10 years, if I'm alive that long. So, it's just, again, the abbreviations, like, what's the seed plant? There's no explanation. You can't find, you have to go online to look at these things, but there is no explanation of what this gentleman's saying, a seed plant. I can sit here and listen, but I can't really understand, and if you watch these programs on TV, it's even worse. But thank you for your time.
Are there any comments in the queue? Okay, well, we'll wait just a moment. Go ahead.
I just have one quick question. June Swall from Morro Bay. And the question is in regard to the wetland by the Willow Camp Creek. And is there anything being done to restore that area? Is my question. Thank you.
Wetland by Willow Camp Creek?
Yes.
Part of Bike Path.
Okay, now we'll see if there are any public comments in the queue.
There are no raised hands in the queue.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, Dan?
Thank you. I've been a part of this and listening to discussions on the WRF since the city council first started taking it up and listening to the discussions of the city council members. One of the things that city council brought forward was that we are hiring Black & Veatch and we are hiring Corolla because they are leaders in their field and they can bring us in on time and on budget. And they first talked about guaranteed maximum price, $126 million. Now in these reports I read, it's not costing anything extra. It's not costing taxpayers anything extra. But now the price is $160 million. So the price is ever going up. At some point, the city runs out of money and they're going back to another 218 to the taxpayers. This cannot continue. These change orders, I don't know how many of them there are in total, not just this time, but in total 70 or more change orders. I hear about design change orders. We were told we were hiring the best, but yet they can't foresee what's going to happen. They can't look at the hillside structure and tell that it's going to crumble when they go and dig into it. And then Carrillo tells us, oh, don't worry, you won't have to pay for it. But guess who pays for it? The taxpayers. It's not right. These design things that are going on, the things that taxpayers are paying for, it's not right. And this group bears a responsibility to say to the city council, we don't think this is right. This is a citizen advisory committee. I understand you are all appointed by members of city council, but nonetheless, you have a responsibility to tell them the truth. To me, this whole idea of recycling water is ridiculous when we're not repairing the sewer pipes. I listened to this gentleman talk about the condition of the pipes going out Highway 41 and how tore up they are and how breaking apart they are. Well, we have raw sewage running out of our pipes into our water aquifers right now, and we're gonna inject water into that aquifer and then drink it? That's insane without fixing the water pipes, and nobody's talking about this. No, to me, that's a subject this committee should be talking about. Why are we doing this? I agree with the speaker on the end. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. And I'm old and I can't, Jan Goldman, thank you. These things are already paid for. What all this committee can do is make comments that maybe we don't think this is right. Maybe in terms of design, these experts that we hired should have said something and foreseen some of these problems before they occurred. Lastly, I think it's ridiculous to sell state water. It's the cheapest water source that we have. We've paid a lot of money for it. The recycling costs more money.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, is there any further discussion on the board here?
I'd like to make a comment. The cost reimbursement contracts, and I've only had 20 years' experience with it. It's 20% cheaper than going with a firm fixed price because the contractors would have to include the risk of something going wrong. If they know that they have to fix something, they don't get a chance to puff up the cost, which Nico is shared with you. You know, if you got someone actively managing a cost reimbursement contract, it's going to be cheaper than doing a firm fixed price just about every time. As far as fixing the sewer pipes, the one water plan, if you go online and look at it, there is a program to repair the sewer lines. And so they're not being allowed, you know, they're going to get repaired. That's part of the project. That's funded through the, that's already funded through the, you know, the price you pay for having the sewage treatment. So it's already in there. There is a plan to fix it. From my experience of watching this stuff, we've got a good crew here at the city. They take responsibility for what they're doing. They're doing a good job. But we're also talking about this cost reimbursement stuff got created back in the 1950s after World War II because they didn't want to do firm fixed price anymore because, you know, it's way too expensive. So, yeah, that's my comment on your questions there, sir.
Chair, if you'll allow the staff to respond to.
Yes, I was just going to ask if staff would like to respond.
In particular, one about Willow Camp Creek restoration. Damaris, are you able to speak to that?
I know there's Willow Camp Creek there, and I don't believe where we are putting the bike path is affecting that creek at all.
There was also a question about the $750,000 extended delay claim, and that may have been brought to this board before, to City Council before, and I believe the understandable confusion of that is that it was included in the budget at $1.5 million back in June, or maybe it was end of May, when we brought that quarterly report from Q1 of this calendar year. That was due to a change in methodology of how we calculate the estimate of completion of the project. We wanted to make sure we were including all possible costs that we knew of, and that's what brought us to the $159 million. And at that time, we put in $1.5 million in anticipation of this extended delay claim. That doesn't mean it was paid out. It was just put in the budget at $1.5 million. We needed to put in a plug number, and forgive me, Paul, for using that term. He doesn't like the term plug number, but so we put in a plug number of $1.5 million. Well, here we are 5 or 6 months later, and it's only $750,000. So we got a half off on that extended delay claim. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, we're not, there's no motion needed here, so If there's no further comments, we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is this county question regarding the desalination idea. Does staff have something for us?
Indeed we do. Thank you, Chair. Let me just pull it up here. So just a very brief background on this. In anticipation that there might be some confusion, I do want to say that the city in the past did have its own desalination plant that was installed sometime in the 1990s. That desalination plant never really worked for technical reasons that I'm not prepared to go into, but it never really produced water for the city. There were ongoing issues with that plant. It was located on Atascadero Road. And right around the time that the operators were trying to figure out the desal plant, the city was successful in its bid to get state water. State water is very cheap. Desal is very expensive, or can be expensive. And so the decision was to be made to not go down the rabbit hole any further with that plant. Fast forward 25 years or so, the plant was in deteriorated condition. The components of the plant were outdated and obsolete in some cases, and it was really cheaper to remove and build new than to fix. And so we decided to remove it. I believe that was a year or two ago. The RO facility that we have that treats our groundwater is still there. Sometimes it's referred to as the desal building, just out of old habit, but it's not. We no longer have a desal plant. Anyways, this is something totally different, what we're bringing to you tonight. This is an idea that's kind of a regional initiative that's in the very, very early stages. We were approached by the county who was interested in looking into a desal plan to provide a regional local water supply. Initially, the county had asked the water purveyors to pay for this, or in part to pay for this kind of evaluation. And none of the water purveyors wanted to do that, and then they offered to just pay for it themselves. So I'll give you that brief background, and what we have here tonight is a presentation about what they're asking of us. And it is presented by our engineering intern, Erin DeAngelis. Erin is a third-year student at Cal Poly, studying environmental engineering. She's very passionate about public service. And besides wanting to save the world, she is interested in water and wastewater issues. So this is right up her alley. And when you're ready, you can take it away.
Thank you, Greg. So as Greg said, this is going to be about the county's desalination executable solution and logistics, known as the desal plan. And so for some background, since 1992, the city has received approximately 85% of its water supply from the State Water Project. And as we know, in the long term, imported water is not a reliable and dependable supply source in the face of sustained droughts and emergency disruptions such as earthquakes. An adequate source of state water depends on precipitation in Northern California and the Sierra Nevada mountains and requires pipelines to convey the water to the Central Coast. In the coming years, state water is expected to face challenges due to climate change. So recycled water, the recycled water components of the Water Reclamation Facility program will play an integral role in providing the city a local, resilient source of water in the near term. However, it is important to continue to evaluate and participate in regional water supply efforts to evaluate future water supplies. We do not know what the climate will be like or what challenges we will have, and with a long and complex project like acquiring a reliable water source, it is necessary to prepare before it becomes an emergency. So desalination could provide a potential additional local water supply that is drought-proof, resilient, and scalable. So desalination as a potential solution, and So desalination is the process of removing salt from salt water to create a potable water supply. It's drought-proof. It doesn't rely on snowpack or weather patterns like our current water supply. It's long-term, it's resilient, and it's scalable. And so that brings us into what the SLO County is doing. On October 18th, 2022, the San Luis Obispo County Board of Supervisors, at the San Luis Obispo County Board of Supervisors meeting, a resolution was passed authorizing staff to proceed with the development of the desalination executable solution and logistics desal plan in coordination with other participating water purveying agencies and stakeholders. And so that's what brings us here. They're asking for us to be evaluated as a water purveying agency. And the next two slides are from the SLO County's desal plan presentation and are an overview of the suggested desal plan phases. So this is their project roadmap. The San Luis Obispo County staff worked with stakeholder agencies to develop a potential timeline and roadmap for this project. More specific details of each phase can be found on the website as well as in today's staff report. Phase 1 and 2 include all the work necessary to identify and vet alternatives and get to a ranking and selection of a preferred project. During the Board of Supervisors meeting, county staff detailed that as part of Phase 2, they will be exploring technology preferred by environmentalists and regulators, with a focus on desalination technologies which have become more environmentally sensitive. The best options will be evaluated during Phase 2, and then in Phase 3, 4, and 5, they'll focus on developing the preferred project. And this is the overview of Phase 1, which we are currently in. The first step has already happened, and we are currently in the second step where we are seeking to approve resolutions agreeing to be evaluated. And the next step will be the Board of Supervisors receiving an update from participating agencies and returning with consultant contracts. And the last phase, or step of this phase, will approve consultant contracts to develop the desal plan with participating agencies. The San Luis Obispo County anticipates that these 4 steps will take place between now and the summer of next year. And so tonight, the recommendation is for the Public Works Advisory Board to review the desal plan and provide feedback, which staff will include in its report to the City Council next week. And thank you.
My first question, can I have the first? Okay. They're still just looking into this, right? And trying to, so it'll obviously be on the coast. Do they have, are you getting any vibes or clues about which city on the coast they're thinking it might be located?
I'll jump in. No vibes. It's not the county style. But beyond that, this is very, very, very conceptual at this point. I wouldn't even speculate what they're looking at. I think the purpose of the evaluation is to maybe identify some potential sites. Even this evaluation, I strongly doubt would select a location. It's very, very early. Even if they wanted to select a location, there would be, years of public comment and negotiations and that kind of thing. So at this point, no.
Okay, yeah. And they're talking about it not being ready until 2045 or something? Okay. Well, my assumption is, so I'm listening to you say that, since it's a county project, it will probably be on county land and not in a city. But, because I was just thinking about how crowded our city was going to be getting with everything.
Well, so the county certainly is looking for partners, and they're not shy about that, but the specifics, it may be on county land, it may not be. You're right that the time horizon for this project is basically 25 years from now. These sorts, and that's if everything goes on schedule. So these sorts of projects take a long time. The impetus for this is a recognition that, reliance on state water has some risk to it. And if it's true that California is going to continue getting hotter and wetter, there may be reduced snowpack in the future in the Sierras, and that presents a lot of challenges for us as a region in terms of our water supply. So why not start thinking about it and talking about it now?
Right.
That's really what's happening here.
And then another thing, when you on a desal project, you have salt to get rid of, right? And where in the past has that just been put back into the ocean? If this is that big of a plant, there's going to be a lot of salt. Will there be salt farms too?
And there's regulations as to how that happens. It would go out the outfall. It may have to be mixed with a certain percentage of water so as to reduce environmental impacts in the ocean. It may have to go out a certain distance. It all depends on the permitting. So yeah, it's not as though there's like a kind of a salt product that we do something else with. It would likely go into the ocean.
Maybe there will be salt farms or someplace, a salt field. Okay, thank you.
I've got, anyone else want to go? I had some questions. One, what's the estimated cost for the city to participate in this?
$0.
So your all funds are going to be covered by this grant you received from the county?
No, so this is separate from the county grant that I mentioned earlier. And I want to be clear that the evaluation that the county is asking us to sign on to is at no cost to the city or any of the other water purveyors. The county is taking on the full cost of that evaluation.
Including staff review of?
Can you clarify what you mean by staff review?
Who, are we just going to say, wonderful, we accept the report, or are we going to take a look at it and provide comments?
For sure, the city would be involved in participating in discussions about the evaluation. And if you mean our staff time in participating in that, I don't believe that there's a plan to recover costs for that, no.
Okay. So, the Estero Bay News had a article that there was $1 million. I guess that's what the county is doing is.
Yeah, that's a good question. So that is a different grant. That's actually for our indirect potable reuse project.
Say that again?
That $1.2 million that we're getting from the county is for the recycled water portion of the WRF program.
And I heard somewhere in there that they were wanting to see if there's any excess that could be shipped off to Los Osos. Is that correct?
I think the idea there, and I don't remember exactly what was in that article, but the overall idea is that in the future, at some point, if the city has excess water, rather than dump that into the ocean, there could be an opportunity for cost recovery to sell that water to a neighbor. Los Osos is interested in doing that. The CSD, the Community Services District board in Los Osos that oversees their water has already passed a resolution that they are seeking additional water supplies, and staff has approached the city in, again, very, very conceptual, casual conversations about the potential for the city of Morro Bay to sell Los Osos water.
Okay. Does our RO plant have a chance to scale up?
That's a good question. Damaris, does our RO plant, and by the RO plant, I think we mean the one on the Tuscadero Road.
No, I mean the one that's on Highway 1 and South Bay. The one the new plant. The new plant.
I don't know that would be necessary, because what happens is, so that's part of our advanced purification treatment system, and so we go through a bunch of treatment steps, including the RO, and then we would be injecting that water into the ground. If we wanted to sell to Los Osos, it would only be after that water gets pulled out of the ground and treated again by RO, and that's the other RO plant, that we would sell, this is just an example, hypothetical, we would sell Los Osos a municipal mix of water. We wouldn't necessarily be selling them only what's coming from the new plant, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
I look at phase 2, 5 years of planning and development. It just kind of blows my mind that, what are they going to be doing for 5 years?
Chair, if I may comment, I believe that 5 years is optimistic. We're talking about potentially running conveyance lines between cities, unincorporated areas. You know, if there's, let's say, 6 participants in this at the end of the day, Los Osos, Nipomo, San Luis Obispo, Atascadero, just imagine all those pipelines. Here in Morro Bay, 3.5 miles is costing us like $40 million. Imagine, you know, dozens of miles around the county, not to mention the desal plant itself. So, also, it's not clear if the county has in mind to have one desal plant, one large one, or maybe several small ones. It's just, we just don't really have any information on that now. So, 5 years, given the permitting and all that, environmental, to me sounds optimistic.
If I could offer, a typical Caltrans project starts 7 years before the first construction stake hits the ground. Planning, permitting.
And that's for a project which all the details are really known at day one.
In our right-of-way.
Okay, any further board member discussion here?
Or just one
Okay.
comment on the desal project. Morro Bay is being approached as a water purveyor, not necessarily as a location. They're looking for interest from the city of Morro Bay as a water purveyor.
That's correct. I'll add that at no point has the county suggested to the city of Morro Bay that they're interested in talking to us about locating a desal plant in the city.
Okay, well then, we're going to ask for public comment on this agenda item.
I've listened to the presentation, and I feel like it doesn't apply to Morro Bay for the following reasons. Mayor Heading has told the Coastal Commission, he's also told the citizens of Morro Bay that Morro Bay has more than enough water. Morro Bay has not only relied on state water as a source of, as was presented in this presentation. Morro Bay has not relied just on state water. They've gone with the WRF and having that as a source of more water. Morro Bay at this point doesn't show any need to participate in a desal plant, which provides very expensive water. My recommendation is, or my hope is that you will recommend that we not participate. I don't like the part of the report that says if you don't participate now, you may not be able to get in later. That's scare tactics. I don't ever respond to scare tactics. Sorry, I just don't. And that's in the report. I read it all. My recommendation is no, we have enough water. Mayor Heading tells us that all the time. Thank you.
First off, I'd like to say that I didn't understand the format here tonight. I thought it was 3 minutes at the beginning for all the subjects, so I got a little bit convoluted, trying to hit too many items. As far as the desal plant, when I was in high school, not that it matters, but I went to Arroyo Grande High School, and the only time I came to Morro Bay was to have dinner on prom night. And at that point, the population, if I'm not mistaken, was between 6,000 and 7,000 people. That was a long time ago. Moving out of the area, I come back, and Pismo Beach has grown tremendously. Arroyo Grande has grown. Nipomo's grown. All the areas that I was familiar with have just exploded. And I don't quite know why the city of Morro Bay needs, quote, all this water when we've got 10,000 people now, unless there's a plan to suddenly, build, annex property. So it'd be great. I mean, I believe in the concept of desal water, but do we really need a lot more water? It seems like state water is cheaper, and I haven't had a problem getting the water, and I don't, like I said, I just don't quite understand the necessity and the push to get more water.
Do I let the time run out or just start talking? So earlier in the night, you started talking about state water, and I was like, what? I didn't hear the very beginning of why you started talking about state water, but whenever I hear the city talking about selling our precious water off, that it's been almost about 30 years now that we've paid for it, and we've been paying into it decades before, so we could be, have state water when and if the time came. And it did. And state water is what's kept this town afloat, not our wells, Anyway, the county, I read the other day, the county itself, when state water went online, you had to tell them what you wanted. So our city said we want 1,313 acre feet. The county actually told CCW, or whatever it's called, the county itself will take 25,000 acre feet. And I saw in a newspaper article I read the other day where they were selling their excess because they've got 24,000 acre feet of water in excess. So they sell it to the people downstream, right? And when I hear this body or the city council talk about selling our state water to like Los Osos, it makes me crazy, because why don't they ask the county for some of the extra 24,000 they have left over from their allocation, not the city of Morro Bay, because apparently the build out is supposed to be somewhere around 12,500 for our town at some point. It's been around 8 to 10,000 since I've lived here, and it's been 40 years or more. But I did want to also tell you, Miss, can't see your name, Willow Camp Creek is a creek that the bike path goes across. And every time it rains, it floods out. So I think maybe that was what the lady was talking about in asking that question. And it did flood out at the last rains nicely. There's a lake there. When we talk about water, and especially state water, the pipes that come here to town that deliver our state water, they're only sized for 1,313 acre feet. You can't put any more water, state water, in them. It's pressurized pipe that was designed specifically as a conveyance for that much state water. So when you think about that down the road, that's one of the things you're going to have to think about with all these pipes that they're talking about for us to sell. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if there are any comments in the queue.
There are no raised hands in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more comment from the board here?
A question for Greg. You're bringing a recommendation to the city council to pass a resolution to participate. And like Dan said earlier, there were things that said that if you don't participate, you may not be able to do it later. But if you participate in the study, you can opt out, right?
That's correct.
And it's costing us nothing to participate in the study?
No cost, no commitment.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I may make a clarification to Ms. Donnelly's comments. So the city does not ever receive 1,313 acre feet of state water because we don't need that. Our demand is around 1,100 acre feet. And so that means every year, even when we're getting our full allocation that meets our demand, every year we are foregoing a couple hundred acre feet, sometimes 300, depending on how much of our groundwater we use. We're foregoing that allocation, and it's being stored for us in San Luis Reservoir. And it's true that that storage does build up over time. The problem with the state water system is, in a very unpredictable way, let's say we have 2,000 acre feet of state water stored in San Luis Reservoir that we could access during times of drought. Well, the problem with this system is, as I said, in a very unpredictable way, the state water program will just delete that water and bring it to zero. And that's something that they call spillage. It's not a physical spillage, it's a paper spillage. And so that asset, or commodity, if you will, of water that's stored on our behalf disappears. And in that example, that 2,000 acre feet of water is of no benefit to anyone because it just got cut down to zero. And because of that, it kind of begs the question, is there some way we can get some benefit out of that stored water while it's there? And that is one of the concepts that is driving the idea of potentially selling state water. So I did want to clarify that. Also to clarify, Los Osos has asked the county for water. And there are positives and negatives for Los Osos to go through the county or to go through the city of Morro Bay. And these are things that honestly will take many years to unravel. This isn't something that's really before us right now. But the broader point that Aaron DeAngelis brought up earlier is that there is an unreliability with state water. On the one hand, because it comes in one pipe, and that pipe is subject to breaking in the case of an earthquake, at which point we don't have water. And so it's not that currently we don't have enough state water allocation. It's true we have a high enough allocation. The problem is that it's unreliable. Many years we don't get the full allocation from the state, and that's the main driver for us to start looking for potential water supply alternatives, because as a city, we are responsible for supplying water to our rate-paying customers. And so if there's a water source that runs out, we have to still give people water for health and human safety. That's all my comments.
I might add to that as a member of the Planning Commission, nothing drives me quite as crazy as a well-meaning citizen of Morro Bay saying that we have a contract for water delivery with the state. It is in no sense a contract when it can be dismissed by gubernatorial decree or reduced to 5%. You don't have any assurance of what is typically associated with the contract. And that's, of course, becomes a justification for the water reclamation plant and some ability to give ourselves some assurance and sustainability.
And to add to that, during drought years, the water that's saved for us is just on paper, right? So if we can say, well, gee, we're okay, we have 10,000 acre feet of water or whatever, but it's only on paper. If there's no rain, there's no water. So you have...
Yes, and I would also add that right now, the state water that we are getting, not in this moment because there's a state water shutdown, but when we begin getting state water again in December, that is not from the city's allocation. The state, we've already exhausted that. And that is not from the city's stored water in San Luis Reservoir. The city's already exhausted that. We are literally just getting water from San Luis Obispo's county's unsubscribed stored allocation. Currently, there's 12,000 acre feet of that left. And the county has told us that they will make us whole this year and next. By the way, they don't need to do that. There's no requirement for them to do that. We're just in the good graces of the county. And they are serving as our lifeline at this point. In a scenario in which the drought extended over 3 or 4 more years, that water may not be available. And, you know, if the rain doesn't come, our only water supply would be our groundwater at some point, right? I don't believe that's going to happen. But those are the kinds of things that when we think about the year 2045 or the year 2055, the water supply conditions may be entirely different than they are now. And in fact, they are predicted to be so.
Could you say that again, please, Greg? You say we've already used our entire allocation for the year?
Yes, that's correct. This year, we received a 5% allocation. And the formula is a little complicated. I don't have the math in front of me, but essentially you take our 1313 allocation plus our drought buffer, and then you multiply that by 5%, and you get, did you just pull the number up, Damaris? I don't know. I thought you had my back on that one. It's something like 250 acre-feet of water that we have. Now, again, our demand is 1,100 acre-feet. So that means we're short, you know, I don't know, 900, just as an example. Now, about 100 of that is going to come from our groundwater during the shutdown, so now we're at 800. So normally in those cases, the city has some back years of stored water in San Luis Reservoir, and we did, and we ran out of that, I believe, in July or August. And so right now, we're just on county stored water, which they have no obligation to give us, but they are giving us and other state water subcontractors, such as Pismo Beach and a couple others, are really just getting water from the county right now. Apologies if I painted a grim picture. But
That's very grim. Okay, is there any further discussion?
Question, next year, if the drought continues, will we be able to get 5% of our normal amount, or will we just get 5% of what we got this year?
Well, the answer is if we get a 5% allocation, it'd be 5% of our normal allocation. It wouldn't be 5% of 5%. But that is determined by the state. I think they usually come around in December and give us their initial analysis of, you know, you're only getting 5%. And then they adjust that in March after some of the winter rains to see if we got rain, then they might increase the allocation. Last year at this time, for example, we were told, you're not even getting 5%, you're getting the minimum health and human safety allocation of 55, is it 55, Damaris? 55 gallons per capita, which is, I'm sorry, yeah, 55 gallons per day per capita. Then that was adjusted by March because we did have a couple of decent rainfalls, and it was adjusted to 5%.
Okay, well, there's no motion needed, so without further discussion, let's move on to the...
Is there any comment that staff could pass along to council on this item?
John?
I move that we approve that we take the first phase process and say, well, we're not out of it, we'll go along with it, and then if we have to make a decision in the future, we can start looking at the money at that point.
May I clarify that?
I move that we recommend that we go through with the phase 1 agreement, get to the agreement phase, and then see where we are at the end of phase 1. And you can rephrase that if you want.
I'll agree with that we'll pass a resolution or to participate in the evaluation in the coming weeks, and then we can opt out if it's not working for us.
So I take it that the motion is to recommend to the city council to approve the resolution to participate in the desal plan, and that was made by Board Member Irwin and seconded by Board Member Goldman?
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll do a roll call vote.
Okay.
Board Member Nava?
Aye.
Board Member Ingrafia?
Yes.
Board Member Irwin?
Yes.
Board Member Goldman?
Yes.
And Chair Rogers?
I agree.
Okay, passes.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next agenda item, the creation of traffic request review process. Is there a staff report on this subject?
I don't have a full presentation, Chair, but I just included the chart, which is, I realize now, probably very difficult to see from your vantage point. This is, and I'll give a short verbal presentation, understanding that it's 7:45. This item came about, I believe, back in June, when our then new city engineer, Eric Ridio, and I made the case that the city receives a lot of requests for traffic, and sometimes those requests involve policy considerations above and beyond the request itself. As an example, someone may request a green curb in front of their business because they want to keep the traffic moving, the parking moving. Well, the issue there might be another business who doesn't want that, or there may be a problem where we set a precedent and then every business wants that, and then you can't park anywhere for more than 15 minutes. So those are the kinds of considerations that, as staff, we would prefer to bring to the PWAB at times with a full analysis, and also notify the surrounding residents and businesses to give them a chance to come to PWAB and give their input. And then staff would make a decision based on that input. So the idea was that we would have a ad hoc committee to look at this, comprised of city staff and a couple of board members, and we did indeed hold a meeting in, I believe, late August. And the result of that discussion in that subcommittee is what you see in front of you now. We've developed a traffic request flow chart, and I'll just go through it very quickly. This is how we want to do it, and I'm looking for a motion at the end of this for approval, or if there's any input for some changes, because we would like to start doing this in January. We have a backlog of traffic requests. So we receive traffic requests. The first thing we have to do is determine what the issue is. Is it an enforcement issue, or is it an engineering issue? If it's enforcement only, we can forward that to the police department. If it's an engineering issue, we then do an internal evaluation. And that may be very in-depth. It may be pretty simple, depending on what the request is. And we found that there's 4 buckets that those kinds of evaluations would fall under. So on the one hand, we will get requests that are just not justifiable for the city to do. An example might be, Joe Smith wants all streets in Morro Bay to be one-way, or all streets in his neighborhood to be one-way. Well, that's just not something we're going to do. That's a very complicated process, believe it or not. That would totally, radically change the way traffic is done in Morro Bay to no real benefit. It, in many ways, is a waste of time to even put any more thought into it. So that would be non-justifiable. We just would respond to that individual and let them know our thoughts on it. There may be cases where we do find something's justifiable. For example, in some cases, when you're at a stop sign and you want to turn left, and we've all been there, where you're looking and you're trying to see oncoming traffic, and the parked cars are so close that you actually can't see. That's called a line of sight issue. If it's something easy for us to fix and we agree, we may decide, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and do that, assuming that we have the budget. So that's just an example. It can be many different kinds of things. Another bucket is a policy consideration. So the example that I made about green curb, well, if we allow this business to do it, we're going to have to allow everyone to do it, and then it totally creates a different kind of, downtown, for example, and that's something that we really want to get public input on before we make a decision on it. So we would bring that to PWAB. And in those cases, I'll be candid that staff would still have discretion on how to handle the situation. We'd be coming to PWAB for your input, and also for the public's input, as they would be invited to come to the meeting. And in many ways, we would expect the PWAB to do their own research. Maybe if we're talking about a particular street or intersection in preparation for the PWAB meeting, that the PWAB advisory board members would would actually go out and take a look for themselves and come to their own opinion and conclusion. And then again, so city staff would act on that request with, in full consideration of PWAB's opinion as well as the public opinion that came forth that night. And then finally, there are those policy considerations, but staff can't take action without council authority. So the best example of that is someone wants to see a stop sign put somewhere, or a four-way stop, I believe, was an example that was mentioned in the correspondence with PWAB tonight. So staff cannot arbitrarily put in stop signs without creating liability issues and risk management issues. There's something called a warranted stop sign, and so if we want to get a stop sign, we have to go through a warrant process. And in those cases, we certainly would, or not certainly, but we may want to actually consult with a professional traffic engineer to do a full analysis and give their opinion about what that would take. Then we'd be coming to the PWAB with that analysis and staff's recommendation, and PWAB, in that case, would then be making a recommendation to council. Well, we think that this should happen. And so that recommendation, of course, would come through staff report to council. So anyway, that's the process we developed, and if there's any input on that, we'd be happy to hear it.
Okay. Any comment from the board?
Yeah, a couple things. So justifiable would essentially would cover like maintenance requests from the public, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so that wouldn't come up to us. So I was aware of the warrant process. What is the process to do traffic calming improvements?
Well, traffic calming, I'll say, and I might kick it to Eric for his input as well, but traffic calming is one of those things that's always developing. Things that were considered traffic calming 20 years ago may not be in vogue anymore. There's also public beliefs about traffic calming that don't necessarily hold. For example, you're not supposed to put in a stop sign for traffic calming. A common traffic calming measure is to narrow a road. But it all really depends on the conditions on the ground. And so those are the sorts of things, if let's say we want traffic calming on Ironwood, we would very likely want to bring that to the PWAB with some level of analysis. Do you have any input to add to that, Eric?
Yeah, for traffic calming, I think one of the things I would like to see as the city engineer is some consistency, some policy that we develop. And this could be part of that process. We have in our budget the LRSP, which is the local roadway safety plan. That is going to be one of the tasks we have before us this year. We have a grant from Caltrans to fund part of that. And engineering and enforcement are two of there's 4 E's, I forget what the other 2 are. But really, through that process, there's going to be community outreach, there's going to be engineering analysis, there's going to be interaction with police department enforcement, and look at ways to minimize risk and traffic-related issues in our city, both vehicular and, vehicular, it covers active transportation as well for peds and bikes. So I would hope that through that process, that will really guide our conversation on developing a traffic calming kind of policy or tool chest to look to, because we don't just want to start throwing up traffic circles or speed humps or in areas, and then we haven't vetted the process. And we certainly want to involve our emergency services, we want to involve the public, and we want to involve professionals in looking at that and providing the best tools necessary.
Thank you. I still like the idea of sticking a living room in a street there to cause everybody to slow down, but that's not probably going to work in the United States.
And I support this idea. I think that these sort of traffic policy decisions, they're often very emotional. People come in with very definite ideas, sometimes heated. And I think the board is better suited to decide these emotional issues rather than placing the burden on city employees. I think we're sort of here to take the heat, and I think we sometimes should.
There probably ought to be a little standard of how much heat the city staff will take before they pass it on to PWAB, though.
Okay, is there any public comment on this agenda item?
I'd like to applaud the effort to get some flow chart, a procedure to put in requests for traffic control. Where I live east of Highway, or north of Highway 41, there are some concerns that I have ongoing. There is a development of like 30, 40 homes there on 41, and the traffic, 41 Main Street is, everyone knows is bad. And I think there's a plan down line for some kind of traffic circle or something, but in the meantime, there's a lot of times I have to go north to go south. I have to get on the freeway, go down to Spencer's to go back to Morro Bay, because the traffic is so bad, especially during the summer, when high school kids are crossing the street. So it is difficult. I think everybody knows that, and the traffic circle is difficult. So, I mean, everyone has an opinion, especially the public, and I watch a lot of people come from out of town, trailers, boats, etc., or construction trucks speeding down 41, and it gets kind of sketchy at times. So I would really, I applaud your getting some kind of procedure to, at least you could listen to concerns. And so I like this. Thank you.
I'm always kind of, my name is Richard Sadowski, citizen of Morro Bay. I'm always kind of interested about the lingo that's used, like traffic calming. Is that what we're talking about? Traffic calming. Well, I tell you, as a bicyclist, if you want to calm somebody, change that bike lane down Main Street. I mean, having a bike lane on the freeway side there is completely asinine. You know, one of the things that they do, like in Europe, they'll have like parking, like a sidewalk, a bike lane, and then the parking, cars are parking next to where the traffic is. And maybe a two-way bike lane coming down on one side would be a lot safer, because, you know, we have these days, people texting and tourists just wandering around. It's easy to drift, and if you're flowing with traffic on your bicycle, I'm surprised that we don't have more accidents, But yeah, I think that number one thing would be, let's be a bike-friendly city. And, with the electric bikes now, with a lot of the older people running around on electric bikes, it would be beneficial to have a safe bike lane on Main Street. Thank you.
Okay, any further public comment? All right, is there anybody in the queue?
There are no raised hands in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further comment from our board here?
I just wanted to make a comment, or just, query the other board members about my earlier comment with respect to the quarterly reports. With respect to those PCOs, I, for one, would really like to be able to read the file, read the explanation for each of the additional expenses, come to some conclusion as to the appropriateness of it on the basis of reading it, and then come to the meeting and hear people talk about it, rather than being forced to sort of reserve judgment till I hear a sufficient narrative to make an opinion. Because frankly, while I looked at some of the numbers and in some of those PCOs, I could not make a decision based on what I read in the report there, because not with respect to, some of them I could, because some clearly said that the request had been made by the city. That seemed to justify. But many of the other ones, I could not come to a conclusion because there simply wasn't enough information or context. And
Chair, if I could interject, and this may be an unpopular comment, but as valid as Board Member Ingraffia's comments may be, it could be construed as a Brown Act violation to deliberate over an item that's already happened. For example, if a member of the public came here to hear that item, when the item was concluded, they left, and there's further deliberation, that could be perceived as a Brown Act violation. So I would ask that that the board does not deliberate on that item, but only deliberates on the item.
I apologize for that.
But that said, Board Member Ingraffia, if you do have questions and would like further detail on anything that was discussed here in the meeting today, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can provide that.
I have just one final inquiry about the policy consideration. Does the city have a traffic engineering consultant or an open contract that can be activated when such an issue arises?
That's a great question, and in fact, we have 2 on-call traffic engineering consultants that can perform, when needed. I believe there was a question about that in the correspondence about traffic engineer, and I can't remember when, but in the state of California, there's actually a traffic engineering professional license that's in addition to a civil professional license, which is what I have. That doesn't mean that I can't make traffic decisions for the city, but I think more agencies are leaning towards having a traffic engineer look at more complex situations to make recommendations, and I think that is something we're leaning towards on these decisions that would require a little bit more deliberation, and having a professional TE look at it is probably something that would be a benefit to the city.
Agreed. Thank you.
Further comment?
I'm ready to make a recommendation.
Okay. Let's see. They are asking for a motion on this.
I would move that we recommend that the staff creates a traffic request review process, transportation aisles, and include in that providing a short report on this, was it local road safety plan, LRSP? That would help us to understand how the 2 pieces will fit together.
And that said, the city does have a budget and a plan to put together that LRSP. Thank you. That would be separate from this and may come later than when we begin bringing these items to the PWEB.
I think there should be a vision on how it's going to get incorporated into it too, though, into this traffic safety or traffic board. So, I recommend that we do it, but also that part of it provide at least a brief report on what will be included in that LRSP, at least the scope of work for your consultant.
Can I interject on that? I think the LRSP, the speed survey, which is we just kicked off 2 weeks ago, MUTCD, all these resources are things we're going to utilize as part of this process. So I think it's just another resource that we will use to guide our decisions. So, but yeah, fair. That's a good point.
Okay, can we have a motion on John's?
No, that's
a second on John's motion.
Yeah, well, no, that's based on what you just said, but let's make it a little bit more general. Say, yes, I motion that we recommend that we concur with the staff's creation of traffic request review, plus also to identify potential resources.
Okay. Can I get,
I will second that.
all right. Do you want to take a roll call?
Thank you for reminding me. It's getting late. Advisory Board Member Goldman.
Yes.
Board Member Irwin.
Yes.
Board Member Ingraffia.
Yes.
Board Member Nava.
Yes.
Chair Rogers. Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay. We've made it through our agenda. I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Our next meeting is January 18th, Wednesday, the 18th at 5:30.
Meeting adjourned at 8:05.
Thank you very much for participating and for all the public comment.
Thank you.